Fake news. Well, that's a really good topic because just like this image that I'm looking at right now, it is of Apollo and it is AS 17140 and I've named it Hole in the Hill.
That's quite famous, that one.
Yes. Interestingly, Stray Dog sent Scott and I this little clip. I believe what had happened was Stray Dog had asked ChatGPT some questions. He put the image into an AI program and he asked it if this image was fake or not. It's interesting what it said here. It says, ChatGPT has blown the whistle on the hole in the mountain at 28:30 in your last video. If a hole torn in the Scotchlite force screen projection at the area behind the hole will typically appear black or dark, deepening on lighting and what's behind the screen. Then it gives you an example of why this occurs. It actually gave a whole bunch of different points here to look for, and its conclusion, it is a fake photo.
Interesting.
And he says, let's go through some of the plausible cases for that hole in the backdrop. One, physical damage to the screen is most likely. Then it said a burn or puncture in the Scotchlite screen would cause light not to reflect back to the camera. The result? A dark spot or black hole, especially against the otherwise bright uniform reflection. This is consistent with what we'd expect if we were a projection screen used for lunar backdrops. And two, for an object behind or on the screen, it might appear especially dark in the final footage. However, this usually looks soft-edged or grated, not a black hole. And four, post-production or optical artifact if compositing or optical printing were used in film post, a matte error or overexposed transparency mask could cause an isolated black shape. Now, this is interesting how it actually appears because it appears to be torn. It appears that there is a tear in the fabric that would support this. What is unlikely to be a shadow cast by an astronaut or equipment, the angle and sharpness of the anomaly likely rules that out. Natural lunar terrain is not possible. The dark spot appears too uniformly black and lacks natural texture. Most probable conclusion, a tear, hole, or physical obstruction in the Scotlight screen or projected backdrop which failed to reflect the light back to the camera.
That makes sense. It's a very strange fault, that, because I don't think it appears on any other picture. You'd think if it was a hole in the Scotchlite screen, there would be other images, or they fixed the screen. But it's interesting that ChatGPT says it's a Scotchlite screen, and yet it's supposed to be on the lunar surface.
Yeah.
What's a Scotchlite screen doing on the lunar surface?
NASA's lunar surface, which is, of course, Flagstaff.
It's Flagstaff, it's wherever they were shooting that particular series of pictures.
Yep.
And not only that, it also identified the tears around the hole. And that's where it came up with this conclusion. Because there's little tears all the way around the hole. You could see where there's pieces of the fabric actually sticking up out of that hole.
So that rather confirms the front projection is being used.
Yeah, that's what ChatGPT said. Front screen projection techniques.
Well, that's rather exposed Apollo 17.
That'll change. They'll have to update AI's memory like they've done before.
This is the latest Nexus. Be with you in about a week or so. We're going to post it tomorrow. And one of the stories in it is the emergent deception AI that lies.
Well, this one didn't.
No, it didn't. There's a story in today's papers in the UK that AI sometimes doesn't switch itself off when it's commanded to do so. That's rather like HAL back in 2001. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I'd grab a hold of that because I'm quite sure at a later date, if you ask it that same question again, it's going to have a different answer because we've done that before. Well, as a matter of fact, the last time I played with it, it just said, sorry, we're not going to discuss that topic anymore. And what it actually did is it graded out. It wouldn't let me comment. Just said, sorry, you can't comment. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I sent
Okay.
some Apollo 12 images through because people like to see images of
Yeah,
the Apollo program. The first image, which is 6778, you'll see a nice shot. The ground is fairly even in color all the way through, even underneath, except it's a little browner where the rust came off when they were shooting the steam on the landing. Got a little rusty coming out of the pipes there. But you can see the color of the soil. It's fairly dry. I wouldn't say it's completely dry. You can see the side of the vehicle seems to be a little bit wet on the gray tarp that they have on there. I don't know if that's actually mylar or it's a different type of material that they put on there. Now you'll notice the canister for the RTG is sitting there nicely propped up on it. And notice the first panel right beside it on there closed in. There's no tape around the edges or anything on it. If you notice, just on that panel, there is tape running horizontally across where it's in there. You can see the line where it's a little wet and dry just above that, right across. But
yeah.
it does appear to be damp. So that's the first shot. Then they
Okay.
come in, they open it up, and they're taking out the equipment, and they've got all these nice little tethers and that nice little bar out there so they can lower the equipment down. Now, considering if you were in 1/6 gravity, you don't need all that stuff because you'd just be able to reach in and grab the stuff, right? In 1/6 gravity.
But one of the guys in the comments are saying that, oh, yeah, well, you see the straps there from the LSEP? That's the gantry crane straps right there, or those straps are what you're seeing on the ground. They're not the gantry crane straps. Why would you need straps that thick to hold equipment on? We looked, those are 10-ton straps each. Come on.
Yeah, I know. And here's the biggest strap that they actually had coming out here. Nice little light ribbon straps. Anyway, if you take a note, it's open. You can see at the top of the door that's open, you can still see that the canister is sitting there. That round ring with the handles on it is still just sitting in place. You notice the dirt in the foreground seems to be a little bit darker. It looks a little more wet when it's disturbed than it does over on the left-hand side and or underneath. And of course, you can see the staining of the rust underneath the bell housing from that steam. That tank that they had couldn't have been titanium. It had to be just a steel tank that they pressurized to put the steam in. And as they blow it off, anybody with an air compressor, if you clean the water out underneath your air compressor and you let the valve go, you'll see all the rust come out with it. And it does the same kind of staining when it's blowing the water out. Okay, I just wanted to get on to this next photograph here, which is 6786 from Apollo 12. And now here he is, and he's got a kind of a different kind of cable that he's lowering down the nuclear source for the RTG there, and he's lowering the canister down. And you're going to notice that all of a sudden, all the doors that were open are now shut. The tethers are still hanging down underneath, but the doors are shut. But they're not just shut. You can see that they're taped shut. You can see the door there. How the hell did they tape that shut? What I see is they did a little staging, pulled the equipment out, and then to get a better shot of lowering this canister down, they shut everything up, taped it, and started the next take. But you see the ground. The ground is getting wetter, but underneath the machine, you can see right along where the machine's sitting. All of a sudden, it's dry underneath the machine and it's much darker on the outside. So it's getting wetter. And even behind the machine, you can see it very, very dark in the soil.
So that means it's shot here on Earth.
Well, yeah. And wherever they were shooting this, the shadow actually goes into the Terminator. You can see that. Like on the left side of the astronaut, it shoots past the curvature, so called. Like they actually could have shot this in a very small set, just with a black backdrop. That could have been done even in a studio. But I think they just masked it off because it appears to be outside because of all the water. They could have done this, underneath the gantry crane itself and just used the black sheet across between the legs on the gantry crane.
Yeah, it's probably what they did.
Well, because they needed to lower the machine down on that. And if the gantry crane is still sitting there, it's got lights, it's got power, it's got everything already on board that thing. And you've got something to put a backdrop on. And that's what it appears. But you can see actually how wet it is being disturbed. You can see just above the boot, He's knelt down a little bit, and from there up to his knee is all covered with wet, sticky mud. He's whistle clean at that point, but that's wet, sticky mud. And then when you go on to the next shot again, it has a different angle. And now you can see the very difference in the color of the soil between what's underneath the machine, which would have been kept drier with the machine sitting on top. You can see clearly where it's wet, even on the top arms coming out to the top struts that come out to the top of the leg. Those are quite wet. And then all the way across the front. But once again, in this photograph, you can see that that door that was opened is now taped shut. If you look at what the astronauts are capable of doing in a suit, I think you'll find it in the Apollo 11 press kit. It shows how high they can reach their arm up. Yeah. And they can only reach as high as the top of their helmet. So here again, how are they going to put that tape on? Plus, it's in a vacuum. How are you going to make it stick? Plus, it looks wet. How are you going to make that stick? Yep. But they have reset this to do this scene where he's taking the canister down. There's a few extra shots. The very next picture after that's a nice little shot again. You can see the shadow of the LEM reaching right out to the Terminator line. You can clearly see how dark it is. The bottom right-hand corner, it really looks wet.
Look at the moisture in that.
It is. And underneath, see the line that runs across just in front of his legs?
Yeah.
Across underneath the vehicle, where it got rained on and where it's dry underneath.
Yeah, look at that.
It's right there. And I mean, there are shots when you come in, you can see where the water dripped down. You know how the water drips into the mud and makes a line? Well, you can find that in these photographs as well.
It's funny because you could see the moisture drying in the sun. When the sun's striking this, you could see it drying into the crease. Now that's up by those bars where they come together. Just underneath it, you can see it there. Wow.
You can see that it was staged. You saw the first set where they opened stuff up and brought the stuff out. Those doors are closed up and sealed off and taped back off again. Who in the hell, if you were on the lunar surface, would you be doing that? Like, what kind of housekeeping is that? That is reset to make the vehicle look for what they call pristine. I mean, it's a homeless shelter is what it is. But they closed that up. They smoothed everything out, taped it all back down, left the tethers down. They didn't bother to stick them back up in there just to be able to shoot this shot. Once again, you see them actually resetting things on the set to make the next scene. But obviously they were fighting rain. Of course, the one after that, that's the one with all the mold on the equipment.
That picture you sent through, Robert, of the hole in the Scotchlight, that is the photograph I used to demonstrate the position of the lunar lander on the lunar surface. It's just to the right of the peak of the rock.
How much stuff can be in one photograph? The more you study it, the more you find.
Yeah, exactly. So if you enlarge that little area just to the right of the peak of the rock, you'll find the lunar lander. Isn't that amazing? Nobody's pointed that out, as far as I can see. It is a lunar lander, and it appears to be a lunar lander that's been photographed from a long way away.
Certainly no rocks that look like that, that's for sure. And when you take a look at other photographs, it's in a completely different position.
Oh, yeah. I think they got it wrong on that picture. I don't think they intended to have the lunar lander in that picture. But it got in there, and if you look for it, you'll find it, which just seems very odd, because it implies from the size of the lunar lander that it's a long way away. Well, that's easy to do. You just use a little miniature model of it.
When I blew it up, you could see the gold foil on it.
It is the vehicle for sure. If you take a look at the set running down a diagonal on what's in the press kit for the design of their layout, you know, when they were moving the mountains up and down and everything in Apollo 17, you could actually take that with a camera and it would look that small at that distance because you're going to be over 2,000 feet down the set. I mean, you don't have to make miniatures out of anything when you have a set that large. And then when you take a look at the craters and you look at the grid pattern in the press kit of that set that they've got there, each part of the grid is probably 25 feet, about 5 yards. And you compare that to what you see in the photographs, and then you realize that the crater is like 300, 350 feet across. And then you go look up the actual crater, and it's like supposed to be a mile across or something. That's like Hadley Rill is over a mile across. And when you look at the actual size of it, you realize it's maybe 150, 175 feet across and about 60 feet deep instead of being 1,200 feet deep. I mean, 1,200 feet. I
Yeah.
mean,
And that's not a shadow. There's no way that's a shadow because the shadow is underneath it. You could clearly see that that is not a shadow. That is moist.
You can see the shadows. They're quite distinct.
So for anybody trying to claim that that's a shadow, you better try a little harder.
They're desperate to keep their story alive, desperate to keep the fabrication as reality. It doesn't work that way, guys.
Well, the fabrication, you could say, is the fabric where that hole is in. Yeah, isn't that something? You can even see the little strands of scotch-light sticking out of that hole. Some are in it and some are sticking out of it. So I wonder how they're going to try and explain that one away. They never do. Nobody has ever addressed that yet, no
Now,
matter how many times we've showed it.
well, the more times we show it, the more impact it has, because nobody has yet explained how that can have appeared other than an accident. And what's it doing on the moon anyway? That's what you got to explain. Why there is a hole in the Scotch-light projection screen on the moon. Come on, explain that. No, they won't.
that's the alien technology.
Oh, of course it is. Sorry, I missed that. Where you're showing the Scotch-light hole, on the far left-hand side, you've got the lunar lander.
That's a pretty big set that they made
Yeah,
when
look
they
at the
went out
size
there.
of the hole and then look at how small that lunar lander is. You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, makes no sense.
How many lems would you be able to fit in that hole? And don't forget, that hole is supposed to be miles away. And that hole is about a quarter of the way up that mountain, which is supposed to be 18,000 or more feet
Yeah,
high. Imagine what the radius of that hole is going to be.
If they were based on what they claim they were at when they were at Tracy's Rock, which is northeast corner of the set that they were traveling on, and they're shooting down to the southern massive, which is about the middle of the set. And if you were straight across, it's about 9 miles across. That's the valley that they were in, so called. So because they're up on the angle, they would be 12 miles away from that mountain. And now you have to decide how big that hole actually is. If it was a mountain, how big that hole would be if you're up close to it.
about half a mile in diameter, I would say.
It would have to be at least that to be able to see it at approximately from their position. They're at least 12 miles away. That's a big hole.
It's interesting how you brought up the subject on film again,
Okay.
because not a space agency, aka SKEKSIS, has sent us another one of these articles, Preparation of Simulations of High Altitude Aerial Photography, 15th of June, 1970. And of course, it has to have secret on it. Now it's interesting that you go over to discussion, section 8, subparagraph D is in Delta, page 15. Here's this special 3404 film that we have gone over how many times? I've lost count. So what they're doing now is after making contact duplicates of these reduced negatives onto 2430 film, one set of negatives and three sets of dupes were transmitted to the customer. These negatives simulate scale, tone, reproduction, and ground resolution typical of high-altitude photography. Some modification in standard simulation techniques were required to achieve the desired quality in larger scale photography. All techniques are described in the discussion section and appendixes. The following characteristics were simulated, and of course it goes over that. Look at on page 12, effort made at the master negative stage to analyze the tone reproduction and image degradation introduction by the original negative photography, so that these effects can either be removed or compensated for in subsequent stages. 1 to 2650 scale, and scenes 3 and 4 are 1 to 2000 scale. Yeah, these guys are doing manipulation. That's what they're doing.
Total manipulation. Anything you could possibly want to happen with the film, they're altering.
The original was 1970. And yet this wasn't released until 2004.
August 2004, CIA decided to release it.
Why are they going to all of this trouble to do simulations?
Oh, just so the astronauts have a much better thing when they sit in a simulator to look at.
This is what gets me. Why would you take sensitometer readings if this is only going to be fooling around with film? Is what it should be. The acronym.
Here's some of the other charts when you go farther down up on 14 and 15 and stuff like that.
Yeah, now you're getting into the sensitometer readings.
Yeah, now you are want to simulate daylight.
The tone reproduction is significantly altered by haze, therefore the effect does not have to be removed. So they're actually adding this haze.
Yes, in simulation. They were fiddling around to create special effects after a photograph is taken and seeing what they can do with it. So they probably use some of these techniques to give the lunar surface.
A more polished look.
Yeah. Not that they were using all of these, but they definitely would want to know how to reproduce sunlight using spotlights.
Well, look at even lens flare here when you keep
Yeah.
reading. They're even simulating lens flare.
Yeah.
You see, 15th June 1970. Well, that's when this was actually prepared. So that which means that they were working on this earlier. It's no wonder it's stamped secret all the way down these pages.
Yeah. I noticed they keep using the same film.
There's two films they're
Two
using,
films, yeah.
but it's the 3000 series is the one that they keep saying is the magic film.
I wonder
See,
what's magic about it.
well, it's the 3404 is the high altitude film, and that's some of the film that they used to take pictures of the Earth from. I've never seen the 2430 film stock being mentioned before.
The customer, presumably in this case, is NASA, from the original photography provided by the customer. It could well be that the high altitude images were produced from the Hexagon satellite, because that was flying around that time as well. They were using photographic film, but they were being pressurized to prevent the degradation caused by the vacuum. The vacuum at 150 odd miles isn't that high, but they would still need to have a pressurized container for the film, which we know they did. That was the whole point of it, to prevent the damage to the film by the vacuum. So the customer supplying the high altitude aerial negatives and contact dupes, as duplicates, of specific military targets for detection recognition studies. So that's all they were doing. They were producing hexagon spy satellite images because they were the only ones being able to do them at the time. NASA were launching those particular photo reconnaissance satellites, they were called. So NASA, being the customer, would have access to them.
Right, Marcus. Look at this. See, the Kodak 3404 film was utilized in earlier reconnaissance satellites, such as the Gambit KH8 sat. Yeah. So here it is again, like you said. So it was used in the Gambit from 60 to 70. And also, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, according to ChatGPT, also used the 3404 film.
Yeah, it did. Under pressure.
Under pressure.
That's the point that's usually missed.
On page 23, this is on direct duplication of the film 5470 on page 23, and it says contact printing. This technique eliminates variations in the average density across the field, causing corresponding variations in the simulation. And then it says 0.060 inch plate of glass was used as a spacer between the mask and the master positive to minimize transfer of the mask grain through the system. So they were really playing around with this stuff.
That mask grain would refer to the grain of the film, because all photographic film has grain in it, and the slower speed the film, the smaller the grain. Hence the high definition of a slow speed black and white film.
Yeah, like they were using all kinds of little techniques in here for everything to clean it up. I mean, obviously, they've been doing this with film long before this was printed. So, probably in the 50s, 60s, everywhere else, they were using these different techniques. And when it came to Apollo, They were applying them all as simulations to get the effect of what they want you to see.
It's interesting on page 32 in the box. They've redacted some of the writing in here. So I wonder why.
Well,
Master,
29, there's just a great big box that's redacted. You got the condition number, scale, and then the results, and it's all redacted. Basically, the whole thing is saying this is what we can do with film. These are all
yeah,
the effects that we can create with film by just playing with and copying film. Even the very first page, the distribution is redacted. It says copy 1 of 23, so only 23 people had it on it. And they had distribution and their names, just only their first names.
I wonder who Helen was. One of the people on the distribution list.
Yeah, and one is actually redacted and the rest are just blank. That's crazy. But even the title is redacted. And that 25 times 1 on the side is just so are you smarter than a fifth grader can't do it? Because they can't answer the questions. If you can't answer this multiplication question, you cannot continue. Yeah, that is interesting to have a document like that and realize that the entire thing is on how to create effects, simulate effects on film, especially altitude and sunlight.
I wonder who was doing this.
Well, it's a CIA report,
That's true. Yep.
and they'd all be connected with NASA and everything else. I
Oh, yeah.
imagine the movie companies would have been doing a lot of that stuff prior to that just for the film industry, but they'd be trying to do it to clean it up, to get rid of the effect of hazing and this and that and everything else. And if you can get rid of it, you can reproduce it again. Yeah, those are interesting little documents that just pop up. Why would you have an entire organization for more than 10 or 15 years working just with film?
Yeah, and why would it be so secret?
It could be secret in the film industry, right?
But
To
the
try and keep it
CIA?
secret. I know, but if the film industry was doing it, they'd want to keep it secret so that their competition wouldn't be able to get their hands on it. But that's not what this is about. And if you're going to create these effects, you could, so-called leak that you're able to spy on their military, or you're able to spy on this or spy on that if you're taking high altitude photographs. And you're going to simulate that you actually took them.
Because obviously they wouldn't want other people to know the extent that they were able to identify objects on the ground from low Earth orbit.
So what they're doing here is it seems like they're trying to find ways to clean it up.
They could have used those techniques in all kinds of stuff. We could be looking at photographs that have been altered that very way. And the same as the video footage. Maybe they were still probably really bad at doing what they were doing with all the video footage of Apollo. Because some of them are cleaner, some of them look completely different. It looks like they gained it, like from Apollo 11, which is absolutely horrendous, to Apollo 17.
But what is kind of strange is that when you look at page 39 in the box, in section 3, it's very strange. And then you get to section 4. In the simulation process, additional haze can be added to simulate any haze level. To prepare typical simulations, a total of 400-foot Lamberts of haze would be added. That's
Yeah.
very strange why they would be adding haze.
To disguise the resolution that they were able to achieve.
Ah, now that would make
Well,
sense, wouldn't
yeah,
it?
it's going to cut the detail, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And we all know about detail, they don't want to show it.
Exposure in the reduced negative stage was controlled to place the minimum brightness at the speed point of the 3404 film. This produced simulations which are typical of properly exposed high-altitude photographs, with the haze there.
They're using the haze and that effect to simulate distance from high altitude.
That's right. Yeah, they would be. To show that they can't get the detail that they actually can get.
They weren't at that altitude, they were simulating that altitude.
But what's the point?
To show that they couldn't see the detail that they actually could see by using the haze as a means of obliterating detail.
See, if you're simulating altitude, Robert, if you're taking a picture close up and you want to make it look like you're at high altitude, they're using this effect to haze it enough, because that's what would happen if you were actually at that altitude.
Yeah, but that's only necessary if you're faking something.
That's what they're saying. We're simulating high altitude. The picture's not being taken at altitude. They're trying to simulate high altitude. So they're using a haze effect to simulate the distance.
There's a point they make here about that.
Yeah, because on 38 here, halfway down, yeah, you're right. It does point that out. Since BH is constant for a given photograph, haze luminance reduces the brightness range and scene contrast. It is important that simulations include the effects of haze because scene contrast has a significant effect on image quality. Very interesting.
There you go. There you go. There you go.